Welcome to another River Radio Sports Central podcast, powered by our friends at NovaCare Rehabilitation, alongside Matt Varney from 103.5 ESPN. I'm Darren Kinnard, and each week we've talked about it, getting closer and closer to the end of the fall season, and it is real close now as cross-country wrapped up last weekend. And then volleyball is going to wrap up this weekend. Our teams are out as of the Super Sectionals, and so that leaves football.
That's all that's left. And, I mean, I've been looking at them. Oh, my gosh, girls basketball starts next week. But yeah, we're at the tail end of football, and depending on how things go, I mean, we may still be talking about football in a couple of weeks. So, we'll see what happens. But this week presents some interesting situations for football. Yeah,
we'll go ahead and start with the cross country. The scene is always incredible at Detweiler Park in Peoria, and we had some individuals, and we had the Anna Jonesboro Lady Wildcats competing for team championship. We had several teams make it, but AJ had a legitimate shot.
And really cool.
And just an incredible finish. 1, 2, and 3 separated by 6 points in the standings. AJ gets third, which is the second consecutive state trophy for the Lady Wildcats. And when you look at it big picture, there have only been 5 girls' trophies for a 6-1-8 team. That's any 6-1-8 team in the 46 years of this meet for the girls. And AJ's got 2 of those in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I did not realize that was the case. But, that speaks a lot to just how strong that program is in recent years. And, because take those away, that's 3 in 43 years, basically. Right. So, they've built that up quite a bit in terms of the 6-1-8 area getting those trophies. But good on them. And as I said, they've built up that program and continue to be strong year in and year out recently.
And they are a team that will only graduate 1 senior, so there's no guarantees, obviously. You still got to go out and perform, but certainly the base has been in place to have. And the thing is that, seeing just the disappointment. Last year I think there was, exuberance because you won, you were second. And, there was quite a bit of distance between them and Tolono. Right. But to be this close, and really there were the expectations that they've got a legitimate shot as well there should have been.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, I mean, honestly, as much as you hate those type of things to happen for a team, sometimes those are the best things that can happen because we were that close, huh? Okay, well, let's get back in the lab. Let's do what we have to do because next year we can't let that happen again. So, we'll see what comes of it in 365 days, but it's not. I mean, third is fantastic, and to be so close, also, it's a great finish. Yeah, you end up kind of going down a spot, but when you look at just how close you were to not just second but first, you made a lot of progress in the past year, and so I'm excited to see what they do in the next, as I said, 365 days.
I think at the time that was the closest state final. And then later in the day, there was I think it was the 3A girls that was 1, 2, and 3 separated by a single point in each spot. So just incredible. Individually in Class A girls, Maya Gilmore medaled, the senior from Murfreesboro. She finished 16th, so congratulations to her. And AJ sophomore Jaden Girardi was the other Class A medalist.
Yeah, and when I saw 16th for Gilmore, because we were getting ready to go on air for Murfreesboro Bree Central at the time. I was talking to my partner, Steve Webb, and I was like, I feel like that might be a little disappointing. He was like, no. He had to correct me, and once he explained it all to me, I was like, oh, yeah, no, that's – it just, I guess, on a personal level, I was hoping for a single-digit finish for her, but nonetheless, 16, I mean, that's all state right there. So you'll take that without a doubt.
And, in that race, Tuscola's Kate Foltz set a new – set a new 1A girls state meet record, and then the girl she beat in second place, Isabella Keller from FPM St. Anthony, was the defending champ. So you had, in that situation, you had 7 out of the top 10 came from the same sectional. Yeah. So it was a loaded group coming in that all of our area runners had to deal with.
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, okay, take those 7 out. Gilmore is a top 10 finisher right there. And so that, for me personally, on a personal level, I would have loved to see her make that. But top 20, you're doing fantastic. And then, as you mentioned, Girardi at AJ, her best years are in front of her.
Right.
The past 2 years we've been talking about her and been like, man, she is so good, but she hasn't even reached just how good she's going to be.
Definitely. Then in the 1A boys race, we had a couple of Benton seniors, Gabe McLean and Cole Buchanan, finishing in the top 6. McLean, I know, was a little disappointed because he had the lead late and then just kind of ran out of gas and ended up 3rd. But, man, still, what a finish for those two guys.
Yeah.
And then Landon Bowman from Pinckneyville also medaled with a 15th place finish. So a good showing. And I know the Rangers are, maybe a little bit sad that, they didn't, weren't able to continue the tradition of winning it and to be right there, but still 2 in the top 6 is pretty dang impressive.
Oh yeah, I mean that's to get 1 in the top 6 is amazing. So to have 2, and those guys got to be honored at near the end of their football game as well. They were able to get back in time to see the game and then get honored as well, which was fantastic. But yeah, to have 2 in the top 6, you're doing okay as a program. Yeah, you would have liked to, been placed the way that you would have in the team category, but 2 individuals that, again, it comes down to, having these building blocks to set up for the future years, and they've set the example now. It's who's going to step up next to have 2 or 3 in the top 6 next year.
And what a storied career those two guys had. McLean and Buchanan, part of some tremendous teams. And have just great congratulations to them. Now here's the way things are set up, and again they don't ever ask me my opinions on this, but you have the 1A girls race at 9, you have the 1A boys race at 10, then the 2A girls race is at 11.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the 1A awards ceremony is at 11. Now the race and the awards area are nowhere near each other,
not.
And so while the 2A girls race is going on, I have a choice. Do I cover the kids getting their medals and the team trophy, or do I cover the other race?
Right.
And so I hate that it goes that way. And as a result, I wasn't able to get any video of the 2A girls race. Yeah. And we did have a medalist. Carterville's Molly Robertson wrapped up her cross country career, stellar career. She ends up with a 24th place and ends up with a medal. And it's one of those things where it's like I can't,
Right.
Look, I would love to be more than one place at once, especially coming up. But again, congratulations to her, and again, I will probably get the trusty email out, and so Matt Troha, if you're watching, you're probably going to get some correspondence. But anyway, again, congrats to her, and again, it's a unique setup, but at the same point, it's just like, why is it 2 separate entities? The race is important, but you know what? So are the awards.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, awards don't take generally as long as a race does. I get that you don't want to have to force them up on a pedestal right after running and everything, but do it right after the race is what I say. And then there's probably 90-minute intervals between races instead.
Yeah, and they've got to have time to verify the numbers, and I get all that. But I think that the better way would be is, okay, you got the boys race at 10. Let's do the 1A. Let's do 1A girls awards at 10:30. Mm-hmm. And then do the awards on the half hour, because the best ones that are getting in there. Anyway, this is our podcast, and it's my chance to rant. So
you don't have to digress on a podcast. You can keep going.
For the sake of brevity, we will move on. Volleyball. We saw our 2 area teams, the standouts from White County, Carmi White County and NCOE. Both fall in the super sectionals. NCOE lost to Hardin Calhoun at the Trico Super in 3, 25-22 in the third. Just a tough way to go out, and that's a team that finishes 37-3. Their sectional final win was also a 3, and then they were used to being in some tough matches here in the postseason, but they had won 29-27 over Edwards County to get to the Super, and they got off to an atrocious start. I mean, they're down 11 in the opening frame, and you're like, holy cow! I mean, what in the world? And then they were able to get it back to 2. Yeah. And eventually lost that opening game, but I felt like that gave them some confidence that, okay, we can play with these guys.
Yeah, without a doubt. And they used that all to get the second set, and just unfortunately went to the side maker decider maker right there in the third set. And unfortunately, I guess momentum just kind of shifted away from them once again. But to have it start as poorly as it did, but then to fight back basically within an inch for the most part. You were a few points away from winning the first set, even being down by 11 to start. It has just in there thinking, man, if you could have just maybe instead of being down by 11, you were down by 7 instead, and that swing came, you might have been able to wrap it up in a sweep, and instead you go to the decider, and that's where you end up falling.
And NCOE is a club that has a lot of young kids,
sure.
Younger kids. I mean, they do lose one of the top players in the South in the state, in Hensley Everett. She's graduating, but they have a lot of talent coming back. And again, this is a program that's had tremendous success over the years, and the same type of success has been brewing just down the road at Carmi White County.
Yeah.
They also finished 37-3, which is crazy. But they lost to Bloomington Central Catholic in the Super, and that felt like it was going to be a tough matchup to begin with.
Yeah, and I mean they get swept in the sense of dropping your first two, but they were competitive if nothing else. It was 25-20, 25-22 if I recall correctly. Yeah. And just you put your best foot forward, and that's what you hope to be able to do in these situations. Whether you win or lose, you want to leave it all out on the court every single time when you get to this stage in the season. So, a great season for the Bulldogs, but definitely don't blame them one bit if they walk away feeling disappointed one bit.
Well, and then you look at the way the rest of the 2A panned out, and Breeze Mater Dei beats Quincy Notre Dame. But we were a whisker away from having 4 private schools in the 2A semifinals, and that's, there's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of people that get upset about that. I'm not one of these guys that says you got to have separate classes for them, but something's got to be figured out because that's not right to have all 4 in that way.
And by having a public school in there, that keeps that argument, that discussion off a little bit longer. But someday you're going to have that happen, and the conversation's going to have to start, because if it happens one year, then it could happen the year after that. And so if we're looking at, maybe 3 years in a row, I think there's got to be something done, because it's not fair to the public schools that don't get kind of the benefits that the private schools do kind of have loopholes to benefit from. It's not fair for that to happen. And so, I mean, we have this conversation in Southern Illinois about every sport every single year, but it doesn't usually pan out to that kind of quote-unquote doomsday situation because someone comes to save the day as a public school. But there's going to be a couple years, I think, in the near future where we will see all-state finals in some sports where it's all private schools.
Yeah, you see it a lot more in soccer and then maybe volleyball. And here's the thing is that, I hear a lot of gnashing of teeth, obviously, but at the end of the day, the IHSA is quick to tell you this is a member-driven institution. Yes. There are 3 times as many public schools as there are private schools.
Yes.
So anything that, needs to be done, you have the numbers to do it. Mm-hmm. Why isn't it done? No, there's just a lot of complaining, figure it out. And, you don't get to just complain and go, well, we can't do this or it's unfair. Come up with a solution. And, and again, I don't know that I can claim that I'm the smartest guy in the room for that solution. There's some other things. One of the reasons that I don't think it's become a hot topic statewide is, I think that this is primarily a 2A, borderline 1A, 2A, smidgen 3A. But, honestly, if you've got 3,000 students, it shouldn't be a problem.
Right, exactly. And, I honestly don't see it, even if it were to come out to where a full state final field has all private schools, I don't see year one of that happening being the IHSA moving on it. I think it would have to be multiple years in a row for them to. So, if you're not happy about it, continue to make noise about it, because otherwise the IHSA is going to sit there and say this is fine until it's been 3 or 4 years of private schools straight in something, and then they might make a rule, and it might be just to that specific sport. They might make that type of rule, but it might be just to volleyball or to soccer. And, if you're someone that hates seeing private schools in football postseason, you're going to have to make some calls.
And that's where the IHSA would sit and go, look, we don't govern
Right,
You know,
exactly.
this is a member driven, and so it's got to come up through the process of, you know, come up with an amendment and get support and go through a roll call. But that's probably a more extended discussion for a different day. And I'm sure there are certainly those on both sides of the issue. But you know, again, it when you get 3 out of 4, potentially could have been 4 out of 4.
Yeah,
that's just a little out of whack.
And the last thing that I'll say about it is you bring up a good point that they do not govern, and that's the great thing about IHSA. They let it be basically a republic type of thing where they let the members kind of make the decisions, and they just are there to kind of dole out the rules that have been put in place. But all the people that want alternatives to IHSA, that's not what they're talking about. And I think the way that the IHSA is set up is the correct way. It's just you sometimes don't like how things go. But they're simply pulling out the rule book and saying, it says right here, you voted on it, that's that. So,
and if they came in and you know, governed with an iron fist, they would, you know,
everyone would hate it.
You know, everybody thinks that's the way it is anyway, but that's the way it goes. So, all right, on to football. We are down to the final 3 area teams left, and we're going to start in 2A with the Johnston City Indians, who took care of their business last week at home against Warrensburg Latham in the second round. And so far, Maddie, this 2A bracket has gone completely chalk. It has been all seeds all the time. And what that means is that Johnston City gets another home game this week.
Yep.
And if Maroa Forsyth wins in the other quarterfinal, they would be home in the semifinals.
That is the case. Now, I don't recall who is Maroa Forsyth playing this week.
They've got Quincy Notre Dame.
So Johnston City, I think, is honestly right now saying, we got to win, obviously. But on the other side of things, I kind of think they probably want Maroa Forsyth.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't want to have to go to Quincy, who's been very good this postseason.
Well, the Quincy, you know, we've talked about it. They play in an enormous conference with Springfield Schools, Sacred Heart Griffin. You know, so, I mean, and again, you're looking at the private school situation, but that is the other quarterfinal, Quincy Notre Dame at Maroa Forsyth. And let's go back to the final week of the regular season and Chester's loss and how that completely changes the bracket. Chester would have been the number 1 seed. At 9-0, the only unbeaten. That would have pushed Johnston City to the 2.
Yep.
And then that would have meant that Johnston City would have been playing Maroa Forsyth here in the quarterfinals with the chance to go. And then you would have to go through both Maroa Forsyth and Quincy Notre Dame, theoretically, to be able to get to a state championship. Oof. And this is taking nothing away from Pana.
Right, exactly.
0. I mean, they've lost once all season. But I don't think anybody would argue that they've played the same type of schedule or have the same type of tradition that Maroa Forsyth or Quincy Notre Dame have.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of, I guess, why we're prognosticating here a little bit. But, I mean, this should be a good game here on Saturday for Johnston City. They, I think, will continue to roll. I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to steamroll. You're in the quarterfinals at this point. It's not expected for you to steamroll anybody. Now, that does happen, of course, but nobody expects it to happen at this point. Pana, while they're not historically as good as Maroa Forsyth, as Quincy Notre Dame, they're still a good team. You know, in the past 10 years, they have kind of hit the scene, and people have started to come to know who and where Pana is. But, yes, they come to Johnston City, and so you just got to give the edge to the Indians, who have been rolling. They had one of the tougher schedules in 2A altogether. When you look at Black Diamond and then you throw in Dixon in there, they've been rolling ever since they took that loss to Dixon. And so don't be surprised one bit if Johnston City comes out of this and are the winners. And the only thing that they really will be questioning at that point is, do we get to stay home?
Or do we have to go to Quincy?
Right, exactly.
You know, and you bring up Dixon, and I think that's a great point in the fact that I think that this is the kind of game.
Yes.
And if they survive next week, for sure, that game really will show dividends. They will not be shocked at athleticism. They will not be shocked at, you know, spread or whatever it is that they're going to see. They have seen a 4A playoff team that I believe is still alive. You know, so they're obviously really good too.
Yeah.
So again, I think that experience bodes well.
Yeah, without a doubt. And you know, I look at this and and I'm not saying Johnston City is going to make it to the state finals. We'd love to see that happen, obviously. Sure. But it's just really interesting to me that Nashville found its way a couple of times to the state finals in the past 5-6 years. But I'm looking at 2019 Murfreesboro. They had to forfeit to West Frankfort in week 6 because they had a teacher strike that year, but it ended up being the best thing for them because they got everybody to get healthy again. They didn't have to play a game. They took the loss, but they ended up probably being the winners for it because they were rested a little bit more than everybody else when it came time for semifinals, for quarterfinals and everything, and they had a great path also when you look at that. Meanwhile, you look at Johnson City, and Dixon was week 7, so I'm looking at week 6, week 7, all these teams that kind of make deep runs in the playoffs from Southern Illinois. Something happens in week 6, week 7, and it's the complete opposite here for Johnson City, but it was the best experience they could have gotten because then they rolled right through Cesar and right through Carmi-White County and right into the playoffs, and here they are, and really looking like potentially the favorite at this point. I know Moreau Forsyth and Quincy Notre Dame are nothing to sniff at, but if you can host that game next week, I think you'll walk in as the favorite no matter what.
Well, and you mentioned Murfreesboro's path kind of opening up. You didn't have to deal with Rochester or whatever.
Exactly.
And so that's the same type thing when you're talking about the difference in Johnson City's path as a 2 seed versus a 1 seed.
Right.
And again, that is to take nothing away from Pana. That is just the fact that Pana is a different animal than Moreau Forsyth.
Yes.
And or Quincy Notre Dame, especially different than having to go through both of them.
Right, exactly. And the fact that you get to, thanks to Chester for Johnson City, they get to go and host every single game up to this point. To be in the quarterfinals and not have to go on the road yet is nearly unheard of. You know, you don't see chalk happen too much in this playoff system. And even if you do see it, somehow, some way, usually the 1 seed goes on the road before the 3rd game of the postseason. So this is very peculiar, and if Johnson City gets to go through their bracket without having to go on the road at all, that's going to be such a huge benefit to them. It's been very peculiar, and it's fun for the Indians without a doubt.
And a lot of times you see the higher seeded teams kind of want to go on the road that second round, especially the really good squads. So you can you're going to be home the next two. But anyway, those are good problems to have for sure.
Yes.
Our other 2 area teams are both found in 3A. They're both out of the River to River, Mississippi. The Nashville Hornets are on the road. They will be facing Tolono Unity, who knocked off unbeaten and top-seeded St. Joe Ogden last week, and they didn't just knock them off. They did it in impressive fashion. Nashville also an impressive winner over Greenville. And so you're going to have Nashville at Unity. That is a 2 o'clock kick. And, again, Unity's one of those storied programs that is, always good, it seems like, year in and year out. But you know what? So's Nashville.
Yes.
And we talked on Pairings Night on our radio show on 103.5, is that just because Nashville got bumped up to 3, don't count this group out, and so this will be obviously a tough matchup, but again, it's Nashville has found the right gear at the right time.
Yes, without a doubt, and I'm going to have a shameless plug here and plug also the River's Mouth, presented by NovaCare as well. You can find it right here on River Radio Sports Central. But I said on this week's episode that Nashville has to make sure this week not to play with their food, okay? Because that's kind of what they've done the first 2 weeks, and no fault of their own, but they've been in close matchups in the 4th quarter both weeks, and then they've kind of pulled away at the end. They can't allow that to happen this time around because the Rockets will take advantage of a close game in the 4th quarter. I'm not saying Nashville doesn't know how to deal with that, but they're a type of team, if you've got a lead on them, don't let them get near you one bit. And that's what Greenville did. They got real close to Nashville, and then they turned the light switch back on, and they were like, okay, let's get away from these guys. Tolono won't let you do that. So just if you're going to go ahead and be the Nashville we've seen the past couple of weeks, don't go ahead and be the part that has been just playing with your food. Just devour them.
Yeah, and, this is, again, when you're on the road, and the same situation is going to hold for Benton as well.
Yeah.
I think it's enormously important not to all of a sudden just be down 14-0 in the first.
Right.
And that sounds, that's brilliant, Kinnard. But it's just, there's such a momentum thing, especially on the road. And, you fall behind and you're 3 hours or 2 hours away from home. And, and that can snowball in a hurry the other direction. And so I think that's going to be really important. And again, we mentioned on that playoff show, not that we were saying Nashville was going to make a state finals run, but we kind of thought they were going to be 2-way, and then all of a sudden they get bumped up to 3-way. Very similar to 96 in Carterville.
Correct.
And everybody's like, oh, well, the Lions are, 2-way, they'll be golden, and they went 3-A, and a lot of people were like, eh. And, that wasn't the case in the locker room. They still knew they could compete. And then the other interesting parallel here is, should Nashville win, should Benton win at Monticello, it's going to be Nashville at Benton in the semifinals for the right to go to the state championship, which also has huge 96 vibes from DuQuoin Carterville in the game of the region of all time, I think. Yeah. I mean, and that was at the old Carterville High School, at the old field, and there was probably 3,500 people there, and that's about 2,500 more than if it's comfortably. But again, a lot of work for both teams to do. Benton going on the road to face Monticello, and Monticello is a team that has kind of steamrolled through things.
Yes,
they took care of DuQuoin in easy fashion round one, and then what got my attention last week, they go to Williamsville and hammer Williamsville 42-14.
That got my attention a lot as well. And the other interesting thing here about this Saturday for Nashville and Benton is they're playing games 20 miles apart from each other, So if you're making the trip up there, if you want to go support both teams, it's not that hard to do.
It's a half hour apart, but if they could have just staggered the times for help out a brother here, and they didn't, but they're both 2:00 starts. Benton's defense has been fantastic, but boy, are they going to be challenged. Ike Young, the quarterback from Monticello, who football is not his best sport.
Right.
He signed, yesterday with we're taping on Friday, but he signed with the University of Illinois to pitch.
Yeah.
But all he did last week against Williamsville was throw for 346 yards. He ran for 100 yards.
That's it, huh?
And was responsible for all 6 touchdowns.
Of course.
Threw 5, ran in the 6. So, and this is, he's 6'2", 180. Yeah. So this isn't your traditional, little scat back quarterback that's piling up yardage. This is going to be quite a challenge for the Rangers defense.
Oh, without a doubt. This is going to be their biggest challenge so far this season, without a doubt. But I mean, they handled Sullivan Oka Valley last week like they were nothing. And no disrespect to Sullivan, but I mean, when I flip on the radio and I hear it's 41-0, 48-7, whatever it was like, oh my gosh, the Rangers are just tearing them apart in a situation that wasn't expected one bit. And they, on their radio broadcast, brought up a very good point that they were looking like the team that shut out Carterville in the season opener. And so whatever happened between week 1 and week 10, not exactly sure what happened there for Ben, but they got back to that. And these playoffs, they've been looking like how they did in week 1 and that we were all talking about. Ben looks like a real monster. And now they do again. They look like a sleeping giant that got woken up and are just terrorizing everybody. You bring up the whole don't want to get down by 14 in the first quarter. At the same time, Monticello, Tolono, they don't want to have that happen on their home field.
Absolutely.
And I can speak from experience from seeing it last week. Murfreesboro gave up 2 quick touchdowns to Bree Central. By the time it hit the halfway mark in the first quarter, it was 14-0 in favor of Bree Central, and you were just scrambling. Murfreesboro kind of got back on their feet, but it still wasn't enough. They end up taking that 34-7 loss. It could very well happen for Benton or Nashville to play the role of the Cougars in this week's matchups for them if they can get out to a quick start. And one final note that I want to bring up about Benton, Justin Groves, their head coach, brought up to me last week that their junior linebacker Ethan McCommons is 1 tackle away from their all-time single-season tackle record. Wow. So he's at 134 tackles right now, needs 1 more, and he'll be their all-time for a single-season tackles holder. That is pretty fantastic. He is just flying all over the field. He's done a fantastic job this year. But the rest of their defense needs to keep it up. The Rangers need to keep doing what they've been doing against a team like Monticello. You have to hold them down, otherwise they're going to find a way to get over you.
McCommon's just a junior named All-State this week, so congratulations to him. You bring up Bree Central, that takes us right into 4A as the Cougars did in Murfreesboro's season last week. They get a home game, and they will face Mount Zion, the team that eliminated Carterville back in round 1. Yep. And of all the matchups, I think that obviously when you get to the quarterfinals, it's a bunch of quality teams. But this feels like it could be the most entertaining matchup because you know Breeze Central. You know we've seen the quarterback and the receiver and the high point totals and this, that, and the other. But I think their defense has kind of gone under the radar.
Yes.
And the last 8 games they've not allowed more than a single score. They've had a couple shutouts. And when I posted that on River Radio Sports Central, we had a comment that said their first team defense had only given up like 34 points all year.
I believe it.
And so now you get Mount Zion, who's coming to town with the 3-ring circus offensively, with a receiver that's going to Illinois.
Yep.
And then you've got a tight end that's getting recruited by everybody, all the big boys. And then, as Carterville found out, they kind of controlled those 2 guys, but it was other guys that beat them, and the quarterback's the trigger. I just think that this has the potential to be, one of the best quarterfinal games in the state, regardless of class.
I agree completely. It looks like it's going to be very entertaining. Breeze Central has fantastic offense, but their defense is fundamentally probably one of the best defenses I have ever seen at the high school level. Just they have the basics down so good. It's you are not going to beat them. They are going to have to beat themselves, basically. They're going to have to make mistakes one way or another, but they wrap up is the thing. And that's so simple to say, but at the high school level, we see it all the time, Darren, about guys that know how to wrap up, and then they go for an arm tackle or they go for the ankles. These guys wrap up the middle, and they bring you down every single play, and they just keep banging you into the ground. Meanwhile, Mount Zion, their offense is fantastic. Their defense maybe not to the caliber of a Breeze Central, but they both have explosive weapons and good quarterbacks. This one is one that if you're looking for something if you're thinking about getting one of those streaming sites for high school football, this would be one of those games that would sell me if I was really, truly considering getting that subscription. Yeah,
it's a 5:00 start in Breeze, and again, I just think that it's going to be a crazy thing. I was, talking to somebody about Mount Zion. I was like, how did they lose to Mattoon?
Right, of all teams.
But then it made total sense when it was like, that was the night the hurricane came through. And it was 65-mile-an-hour winds and rain with that passing attack. I was like,
that makes so much sense now. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And the light bulb's like, why didn't you think of that?
No offense to Mattoon, but as someone that grew up in a conference playing Mattoon every single year, and they were basically one of the 2 or 3 options for a homecoming game for everybody else in the conference, whenever I see that Mattoon beat someone that feels like they shouldn't have, it truly is how did that happen? And now that you say that, that makes plenty of sense.
Makes total sense. Now, the other for a quarterfinal is quite enticing as well, as Normal U-High will go to Cahokia.
Yeah.
We've talked about Cahokia being a sleeper as a 6 seed. Normal U comes in as I believe it was a 10 seed.
Yeah.
And again, the seeding is not, there's nothing subjective about it. It's just basically by record and stats, but Normal plays in a great conference. But again, Cahokia is certainly no stranger to playing quality teams and teams that are, from bigger schools and that. And so again, I think that might be 1A on the most entertaining quarterfinal chart.
Yeah, it just might be. It is a very good looking game without a doubt. And I don't know exactly where it's at, but I made this remark
It's at Cahokia.
It's at Cahokia. Okay, so this doesn't play a factor, but U-High does play at Hancock Stadium, and that's where the state finals are at. If they were able to make it to the state finals, they'd have. It doesn't feel like it'd be a big edge, but it would be a big edge in that they know that field better than anybody else. Who they were playing last week also, Alney. I had said on our Murfreesboro broadcast, man, if Alney could win that, they'd have such a huge advantage against whoever they were to see in a potential state final because they've been here, and whoever they were seeing wouldn't have been. So, but nonetheless, U-High continues going on. That does feel like a really good game. U-High is kind of up and down every single year, but when they're good, they are almost always very good. 10 seed doesn't mean nothing at this point.
No, not at all. And they really dominated Alney. And, I think that was a 48-13 final. So, and again, I think that's where the schedule difference really shows up in that one. The only other regional teams we have left in 1A, we've got Altoff at KZ West, or excuse me, it's KZ Westfield at Altoff. as seeds have held in that one in 1A. And then in the bottom bracket, it's Calhoun at home against Camp Point Central. Calhoun eliminated Cecil-Waltonville. And from looking at some of the pictures and video from that, I don't know how Calhoun has a field this week, as it was just an absolute mud bowl.
Yeah, well, that happens sometimes at this point in the season.
If you don't have turf.
If you are lucky enough to make it to this point in the season, you're probably, if you've got grass, you probably have a field that kind of looks like theirs, but theirs might look a little bit worse because of just how bad the weather was last week. And I think almost everybody else in the state was playing on turf, honestly. So, but those two quarterfinal matchups honestly are very enticing as well. You know what you're going to get out of 1A usually? It's usually run, and then run a little bit more. Right. Sometimes you have a little bit of a passer in 1A, but those two matchups right there all generally make it this far, one way or another, and it's just a bunch of powerhouses going up against each other. Don't be surprised if those games all end in 90 minutes.
And that's the thing is that we talked about Mount Zion losing the Hurricane game is, Cesar throws more than Calhoun does, and it affected them adversely. You would think a lot more than it did from a team that, maybe had completed 12 passes all year.
Yeah.
So that kind of certainly hurt the Red Devils, but still a great season for SVW. Had a hiccup there at the end in the regular season, but to go on the road and compete in those conditions, really a salute to SVW.
Yeah.
The only other regional team, East St. Louis, the Flyers have just absolutely obliterated their first two opponents by a total of 115-0.
Yeah.
A little bit different animal this week. They will be going on the road to Chatham-Glenwood.
Yeah.
So we'll see. If that ends up a clock game or ends up a 4-score game, then that really will solidify my thoughts that ain't nobody touching them.
Yeah, and I don't think that anyone is gonna touch them. They might get a score on them, but I don't think anyone's getting near the Flyers at this point. I can say I've played at Chatham-Glenwood in my high school career, and it was a Friday night, so it felt weird to begin with, and then just their setup, from what I recall, was a little strange a little bit as well. But East St. Louis, they're not going to let that affect them one bit.
No, not at all. You mentioned girls basketball starts on Monday.
Yep.
Boys basketball practice started this week. The games will start the following Monday, and we've had an old joke for a long time is the fact that starting next week, I believe we have a tournament every week until March. There is a tournament somewhere in boys or girls basketball.
We may not see it in our region, but there will be something every single week.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the River Radio Sports Central podcast, powered by our friends at NovaCare Rehabilitation. For Matty V, I'm Darren Kinnard. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week.